Thank you very much. I'd just like to start from the beginning. I've got 3 minutes, and I may take 2. Not too long ago, several years ago, I was in Korea. I was there with a group of members of the 16 nations that joined the UN forces when we went into Korea. And it was a banquet. It was in the evening. And it was well attended. And I guess they asked me to speak because I was a former congressman, because there were flag officers there and people of the armed services of high rank. But because I guess, as I said, I was a congressman, they asked me to speak. But right here, they had a table for 4, right here. And I imagine there were about 500 or 600 of us, white-haired, with our spouses. And you can see that we're getting old fast. But that table right there was devoted to those who never went back to their homes, who died in Korea. And I always remember that because as I stand here, I'm 80 years old now. I had my grandson with me in Korea, and I invited him to come up. And I had the pleasure of having a grandson with me and being able to introduce him to my colleagues from the battles of Korea. That table never had a chance. They never enjoyed what I was able to enjoy. So to the young people here, I just want you to know that the battle was not easy. And as your memorial says in Seoul, listing every American that died on bronze plaques, I honestly feel it was a war worth fighting. And today the Korean people, not only here, who are residents and citizens of the United States, but those who have created a magnificent country in Asia. To all of you, I say with all sincerity that I can't do it again, but if I was 18 or 19 and we were faced with the situation, I might give it a try. But there were so many who paid a price. And I say that to you because I just want you to, please do not take it for granted. This was something that many people died for. And as I said, I am happy to say that I'm glad that I, in a small way, was able to participate. And one other thing in closing. Korea is a very strong spiritual country. I remember looking out of the window at one of the taller hotels, and I saw Red Crosses silhouetted all across Seoul. And I said, geez, the Red Cross really has a presence here. And it wasn't that at all. It's a strong Christian nation, a strong spiritual nation. And God has truly blessed it and has given you so much. And I'm happy to say you've accepted what God given you and you've made it better. And I thank you for the minute or two you've given me here. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Garcia, for those very moving words. Now I have the pleasure and honor of introducing the keynote speaker for our luncheon. He's former Senator John William Warner. He served as a senator of Virginia 5 consecutive terms after first being elected in 1978. He served on the Senate Armed Services Committee, including 3 periods as chairman, and was viewed as one of the most influential senators on the military and foreign policy issues. Before entering the Senate, Senator Warner was the Secretary of the Navy from 72 to 74, and Undersecretary of the Navy from 69 to 72, and the Department of Defense representative to the Law of the Sea Talks in Geneva. He's practiced law at the firm of Hogan and Hartson, and he currently is a senior advisor at the law firm of Hogan Lovells. Of course, he served in the United States Marine Corps during the Korean War, and also the United States Navy during World War II. Please join me in welcoming Senator Warner.
Thank you very much for that warm greeting. I should not stand between a warm meal and go on for very long. I told the kind host, our distinguished chairman, and Ms. Kim and others that I would not give a full speech today, but I would come, as my distinguished colleague has just done, and share just a few moments about my privilege, one, to have worn the uniform of this country and been part of a force of hundreds of thousands of Americans that went over to engage in that war. Harry Truman was President of the United States. America had just emerged from World War II. Again, I'd served in the Navy in the last year, 45, at the age 17 as a seaman. And I had a feeling, although I had not been in the combat of that war, what was the proportionate enormity of that battle of World War II, 16 million of our countrymen alone. And now in a mere 4 to 5 years, suddenly the clarion call is sounded for America and, as Representative Garcia said, the United Nations to respond, to defend the right of democracy of the South Korean people. Well, here at home, I'm being very candid, we were in disbelief. How could, in such a short time, and the demobilization of 16 million having just taken place, could we be asking of our men and women in uniform to once again respond in the cause of freedom? Particularly when the Soviet Union was among the strongest of our allies that brought the cessation of the war in Europe. And the Soviet Union declared war against Japan in the towards the very end, rather skillfully, so they could participate in how the assets of Japan and their country, and we would settle that war as it related to Japan in a manner comparable to what we did with Germany. Again, working as a group of nations to resolve the end. Here we are now faced with communism. And it was viewed by Truman and others more erudite than I are going to discuss it in greater detail in this conference. It was viewed as a conflict to stop Stalin, who was then the head of the Soviet Union, wished to spread communism. It was his first real overt attempt in terms of a land grab, using as a proxy state of North Korea. Okay. I'm in law school, studying in my second year of law. I got a set of orders. You got 21 days to get out of law school, sell your books, car, room, everything, and be back and report for duty. And they call that war the Forgotten War. The people did not have any idea why I was going. All the other students in the law school, well, most of them were World War II, so they weren't eligible for draft. I never was drafted. I volunteered each time. But they were all there, and no students who hadn't been in World War II were drafted. They all got deferred, everybody. The reserves. Well, that chapter in history solidified the importance of the reserve and guard components in the time of emergency. Because Truman had been, I think quite properly, downsizing our military in the aftermath of World War II. And suddenly there was this surge that was required. The troops available were those that were stationed in Japan under MacArthur. So he made MacArthur the chief, and the war began. And for 3 years, in 1 month and a day or two, it was a bloody conflict, as my colleague very humbly and softly stated. I don't claim to have been in the forefront of that, but I ate, lived with, slept, bunked in little tents with those that did. And I traveled back and forth between our air base in Pohang Dong, a small fishing village, and where the Marines were positioned in the forward lines to check on how well our aircraft were communicating and vice versa and everything else. I saw a lot of the Korean people. And I sat there somewhat aghast in the morning session when this question of rape, incest, and so forth, our forces. I never saw any of that. As a matter of fact, we were so busily engaged, we didn't have hardly any time. I remember so well at our air base, we carved that air base out of raw ground. All we had was a sheet of corrugated metal down in the ice and the mud, and we took off and landed from that strip. And tents, we lived in tents, and we had small little stoves because, believe me, the enemy was the weather in many ways. I might turn at the end of my comments to say a word about that. But I thought this morning as I listened to the first panel, it was very good. But Bill Cohen, former colleague, senator, I don't know whether he's here or not, but Bill Cohen captured by talking about remembrance. Let us not forget of the enormity of that sacrifice. Yes, the United Nations, but we were part of 16 United Nations forces. And we were all in it together to stem communism. We, that group of brave soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, men largely, a few women, I remember nurses and so forth, but they laid the foundation for what became, far beyond any expectation, but what became one of the most prosperous, strongest allies that the United States have had, and that's South Korea. And any question that we might not in any way come to the support of that country, once again, if their freedom were challenged, forget it. We would do that. I'm absolutely certain. So I just want to humbly acknowledge, first, the gratitude to the government of South Korea, which bestowed upon me a decoration some years ago, but I accepted it. I said I would not accept it as an individual. I would accept it only on behalf of all the men and women in that conflict. And I want to also stress, I remember vividly on trips up to the front lines where I'd bunk overnight with the troops. I remember one night very vividly, because it was always the question of infiltrators. The forces then would infiltrate in the middle of the night. They had ways of doing it. and we did the same thing. But I'm telling you, when we were in this particular bunk, I remember one night, the officers told me, "You can sleep well tonight, because along our side, right next to us, is a rock division. And those infiltrators won't go anywhere near that rock division." It wasn't a division, it was a battalion. And the rock soldiers, yes, in the early days of the war, they were ill-prepared, ill-equipped. They didn't anticipate the surprise attack, and they had their setbacks. But once they had the opportunity to have the training that I think the United States in large measure and the other UN countries did it, boy, they were as tough and fine of fighters as I've ever seen. And today the forces, I'll leave that to the military seniors here, but those commanders who followed that period, because my period was just about the same time as Representative Garcia, fall of 51, spring of summer of 52. Boy, they were grand soldiers in those days, and they really knew what they were doing. So I just want to say with the deepest sense of humility, I thank the chairman for including me in this conference. It is a vitally important conference. You are driving down once again on the foundation established by the sacrifice in that period of 3 years. But that foundation is solid. It is there. We are trustees to perpetuate the legacy of those who made that great sacrifice. So on behalf of all served, my colleague Garcia, I salute them and I thank them.
Thank you very much, Senator Warner, for those moving words. Just before lunch, we have another very special guest who would like to invite to the podium to address us. He's none other than the ambassador from the Republic of Korea to the United States, Ambassador An Ho-young. He's had a distinguished career as a diplomat, foreign service officer. He served as a President's Sherpa for the G20 and G8 outreach meetings. I think in this capacity, this was the first time that Korea really began to make itself felt in the global stage. And I think this really represented the coming out of Korea as a true global player and a stakeholder in the international order. And Ambassador An was one of the primary movers in that whole movement. He also served as Korea's ambassador to Belgium and as vice minister at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. So please join me in welcoming Ambassador An Ho-young.
Well, the Honorable Garcia, as well as Secretary Warner, have already said they do not want to stand between now and then the warm meal. And I guess I'm the third impediment standing between you and then the warm luncheon. So I think I will try to make it as quick as possible, as short as possible. I, in fact, was not being planned to come and join you for this luncheon. But when I knew what the purpose of this luncheon was, I could not say no. Because I came to find, in fact, this is a luncheon in honor of Korean War veterans, my favorite people in this town, as well as my favorite people in the United States, as well as my favorite people on this earth. So I said to myself, I cannot resist this kind of invitation when it is for the cause of Korean War veterans. Dr. Ham, he already said, I'm quite new in town. How new am I? I arrived on the 4th of June. So this is my 20th day here in Washington, D.C. And what did I do for the past 20 years? I kept on thanking you, the Korean War veterans, for what you did 60 years ago. Let me elaborate. On the 5th of June, that is to say on the first day of my official business here in town, what did I do? I came to the Korean War Veterans Memorial to pay my respect to those veterans. Last week, what did I do? I went to the Pentagon because at the Pentagon there was the opening of permanent exhibit for the Korean War. So I stood there along with the Secretary, Chuck Hagel, as well as the representative of Korean War veterans, Mr. Ewing, and then we cut the tape for the permanent exhibit. When we cut the tape, then there was a phrase on top of the Korean War exhibit, permanent exhibit. What did it read? The Korean War, 1950-1953, the forgotten victory. That's what it read, the forgotten victory. And the moment I read it, something hitting me very hard, deep in my heart. Because I knew for a fact that in this country, the Korean War has been known as the forgotten war. Now, what I read on the permanent exhibit, it read the forgotten victory. So between forgotten war and forgotten victory, the difference is just one word, war and victory. But I said myself, the difference between forgotten war and forgotten victory, that's, how could I say, something you cannot count at all. Why? Because let us think about the emotion when you say forgotten war. The emotion would be that of frustration, deep frustration. Why? Because I went to a country far off from the United States, which I didn't know even existed at the time, and then I fought. I even risked my life. I lost many of my colleagues. Still, citizens in this country do not remember the sacrifice we made. So that's a deep sense of frustration. That's an emotion underlying the forgotten war. But what about forgotten victory? What is the underlying emotion? I think it's an emotion of pride. Why do I say that? It's because forgotten victory, what it means is exactly the same factual situation. I went to a war, I fought hard, I lost many of my colleagues, and then what did that all mean? Now I'm so proud about economic progress which is made by Korea. I'm so proud because of political development they have achieved in the country. I'm so proud about what Dr. Ham said. I mean, they are so active on many of the important issues, global issues around the world. So I feel proud. That, I think, is an emotion underlying forgotten victory. So that, I think, is the reason why I physically and then emotionally felt something hard, hitting deep down in my heart. And then I concluded by saying, that's what I said just 1 week ago, and then I have the pleasure and honor of repeating it again today. And then I conclude by saying, well, in Korea, of course, we are thankful, deeply thankful for what you did. And then we are proud as well for what we have achieved over the past 60 years. But at the same time, I want you, the veterans of the Korean War, to be feeling equally proud about what we have achieved. Why? Because without your sacrifice, without your service, then all of what we have achieved over the past 60 years would not have been possible at all. So thank you so much, and then God bless you.